Hey everyone, welcome to LTG Live, the last episode of season 3. Peter Reeves, what's up? Good to see you, my man.
Good to see you, my man. Come on. We are here.
This is it. This is the final episode. We have saved the very best of the best guest for last. Like, we're bringing our best here at the very end. We'll introduce him in just a moment. But this is crazy, Peter. You and I started this thing like a little over a year ago. Now we're finishing up 3 seasons. And it's like, this is crazy. This is wild.
Yes,
we never expected this,
man.
right?
Yes, sir, man. Our guest today has the best book, the best hair, the best smile, the best American flag,
the best office, everything is the best. Everything's the best. That was definitely an inside joke, and some of you never know what that actually meant. But he's smiling backstage right now for sure. Hey Peter, I'm gonna throw this question at you. I didn't even prep you for this, but like we've done 3 seasons of this now. Highlights, like what's a big highlight for you from like the 3? Right, I know. I figured I'll keep blabbing here for a second to give you like a moment.
Dude,
like so many different
highlights.
Guests. Yeah. Big highlights.
Char Blair, fire. That was probably one of my favorite episodes, man. Loved her. Laughing with Reggie Dabbs, that was awesome, man. We just went into that one swinging. Yeah. I think too, this last week honestly was a game changer for me. Micah. So much depth. Micah Steiger, man. So much depth with that dude. I enjoyed it, man. It's a lot of cool guests.
I thought about things he said for days after that episode last week. If you're watching right now live and you don't know, you didn't catch last week's, go on the Lead the Generation Facebook page or go on the YouTube channel and check it out. Whatever. Like it was really, really good. It was amazing. One of my like high moments and low moments was when we interviewed Jeannie Mayo, because that was amazing to have Jeannie on, but it was also my low moment because like all of my internet connection just like went away. It just said bye bye.
Oh yeah, I mean, we ran that episode though, man. It was good.
You did. No, Peter just took over. He's like, I got this. I'm good. You don't even. It's all good. But hey, drop who you are in the chat. We want you to be a part of the conversation. Tell us who you are. Tell us where you're watching from. If you caught us right at the beginning, you saw that recap video from LTG conference that just happened a couple weeks ago. Dropping in the chat right now a link for all of the sessions for the conference. So if you missed it and you want to get over 3 dozen sessions plus all the sessions from all of our previous conferences, it's like over 100 hours. It's a real simple subscription, $5 a month, right? It's like a $5 foot long, except for it's like $5 every month. But it's incredible. Peter, I know you use it with your leaders all the time, which is amazing. Plus, you get Peter Reeves' session. Craig Hicks, I see you. What's up? Good. Good to see you, bro. Yeah, drop who you are. We want you to be part of the conversation, and it's going to be great. But we want to introduce a special guest of the LTG fam. Peter, come on, take it away. Who we got today?
Dude, our guest today is one of my best friends on the planet. And I think we talk like 5 times a week, and he is so gifted. He has like 52 titles, but he's most known for right now as the author of Called, possibly the best resource on the planet for students who are called into ministry. Our guest today is none other than my boy, John Zick, people.
What's up, guys? Come on.
Yo,
hey, this is the last one. One of season 3.
This is it. This is the grand finale episode of season 3.
What an honor.
Look at that guest. Look at his hair. Look at that office. I mean, look.
I got a little clip right now.
So good.
Got the flag back there. There it is. It's all there, Peter.
You're set.
There it is.
So we were like joking around and making fun because right before we went live, like John like ran through his office and just did like massive
I had to clean my pillows,
cleaning everything, So so good. But Brian Prizer, we see you, man. New Jersey representing. Glad to have you here. So, John, thanks for joining us today. This is gonna be a great conversation. We're so excited. You and Peter have been friends for a long, long time. You and I, the last couple of years, first connected with you a couple years ago when we were doing one of your youth camps when you were still there in Michigan, youth pastor.
Yep.
And don't remind me. I missed it.
We still talk about it. That's like one of the main things I miss from youth ministry is when we did our combined retreats together, Peter. It was
take me back.
Take me back. So, John, you've been on with us before. We've had a bunch of different conversations. You've spoken at Lead the Gen conference several times now. Again, another shameless plug. If you didn't download yet, or if you didn't sign up and subscribe to Lead Now through Lead Generation, you're going to want to, just because of John, because his session, just because of John, because his session, Fostering the Called, was one of the breakouts from this year, and it goes along with this. Woo!
Come on, there it is. It's so weird to see it. Like,
it's so weird, right. You worked so hard on this thing, but your breakout that you did for the conference directly connects to this book entitled Called. So, John, let's just jump right in. Tell us about this book, this brand new resource. And while you're doing that, I'm going to drop a link in the chat for people that want to go to the website, check out the book, buy multiple copies of it, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So the book is targeted towards students that feel called to ministry. And right off the bat in the book, it talks about the difference between a call to vocational ministry and then the call that every believer has. You know, we all have a call to cover the earth with the love of Jesus. Like that is a mandate given to every believer on planet Earth. No one gets to run from that or be outside of that. We all have that call. But this book is specifically for those that feel that call to vocational ministry. If it's evangelist, missionary, church planner, youth pastor, kids pastor, compassion ministry, you know, a CEO of a nonprofit one day, whatever that looks like, but it is specifically for those that feel a call to vocational ministry. And, you know, the whole idea behind the book is you can start right now, regardless of your age. If you're 13, if you're 7, when I felt called to ministry, if you're 21, you can begin working and preparing for your call today. You don't have to wait until you graduate high school. You don't have to wait until you have a degree, until you're in maybe your first ministry position. Like, start now building the healthy foundation that's going to sustain you for a lifelong journey in ministry. So that's the whole point of the book. That's the reasoning behind it. It's 6 simple, practical steps. You know, the book is 8 chapters long. The opening, the ending, and then the 6 in the middle are just 6 steps that students can start doing immediately that I believe will set them up for a healthy ministry journey.
That's so good. Hey, Peter, when did you get called into ministry? I just because John was like, I was 7 years old. And then for me, I was 14. What was it for you?
Yeah, I was like 15 or 16, man, at a Pendle youth camp. I could point to the spot that I felt called to. Dude, it was a powerful moment. And this book scratches an itch that's kind of been out for youth pastors for a long time. Like, I remember when I felt called, I was like, what now? And they were like, be a campus missionary. Yeah. And then it was like, okay, then now what after that? They're like, now go to Bible college, right? And like the pathways that were given to me were so long. I was like, man, and not even a lot of support. And so I'm thankful for a resource like this for my kids who are getting called right now. You know, even last week we had 4 called to be missionaries, and it's like we have something to hand them. And for something to start and for them to start investing into right now. I think it's real powerful.
Yeah. And that would be Peter, just going off what you were saying there, what I've been saying with this resource, when I was a youth pastor, I had a stack of how to get free from pornography books in my office ready to go. I had one for girls and one for guys. They were made by the same organization. I had to buy 10 of each so that the moment a student came and said, hey, I'm addicted to pornography, I had a resource ready in hand to give them immediately. I didn't have to say, hey, wait, come back in 2 weeks. I'm going to order this book for you, and then I'll have something for you. I've lost them in that moment, in that window of time where I didn't have anything. Maybe I just prayed with them and said, we'll be praying for you. You can do this. But what was the practical tool that I had for them? And so that's kind of how I'm relating this called book. Obviously, it's different. It's a different resource than the pornography books that I was talking about, but the same concept, that a moment a student feels called to ministry, you have something in hand ready to go. Have a stack of 10 of these in your office. If you're a youth pastor or a leader watching this, be ready for that moment that God calls somebody in your ministry to ministry. Because what an incredible, it's humbling, that God trusted me with this student that he's called to ministry.
Yeah.
How am I going to steward that? How am I going to foster that? How am I going to develop? How am I going to be intentional? And it's not just saying, all right, cool. Here's one of the colleges that you can go to. we'll see you later. We'll see you then. Like, how can I really get intentional about developing that individual that God has trusted to me, that God has trusted to your ministry, to your leadership, to develop them and get them ready for the call that's on their life?
Well, this book is a solution. And so, John, talk a little bit about the problem that occurred, like you talked about a little bit with having the 10 books and the resources, but build the story, because all three of us were present for that moment, man.
Totally.
So talk about it for a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
Before you tell that story, Peter, I did not know that you got called into ministry at a Pendel camp, and you said I could point to the spot it happened, and me too. So I just wonder if our spot is the same. What if it's the same spot? It's the exact same spot. Let's go.
That's amazing.
But yeah, John, unpack the story behind this, because it's fun for all three of us, just because we just it was a Holy Spirit collision, and we all got to be a part of it.
Totally. Yeah. So it was when, I was still youth pastoring in Michigan, and, Peter and I would always do our retreats together. So we did like a winter retreat and a summer retreat, and we brought our youth groups together and did them every year like that. And so just a fun time where our students could come together. They really started to create that bond within the youth ministries. And so it was just an awesome thing. But, Aaron, you were our guest speaker for one of those, and you did an altar call one night where you had students that felt called take off their shoes and walk down to the front. And so we're sitting in the back, like Peter and I are in the back, just kind of waiting for this moment. And obviously we know some of the students, like, hey, you better be responding. We know that, God has a call. We've already talked to you about this. But to our amazement, there was 80 students. I think literally it was almost split down the middle. It was like 40 from your group, Peter, and then 40 from our group that responded to this altar call, that walked down with their shoes in the air, saying they felt called to ministry. And we were in the back like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is incredible. And then it was like that scary moment, because it was like, what do we do with this?
What do we do now?
Right.
Like both of our ministries have student leadership programs. Both of our ministries are really intentional about building leaders at that time. But this is even another level now that we have to begin to think through these students. God has trusted us. Again, God has trusted us with 40 students in my ministry and in his ministry that say and have identified, yes, I feel called. What can we do with them? So immediately in that moment, we both took our students to the side. He took his, we took ours, and just kind of talked through them. And then it was like, okay, let's get really intentional about this. So that next week, the team went back and we started just to research, what can we do with these students? Is there a book? Is there a curriculum? Is there something that we can begin to go through outside of our normal student leadership? Because again, we already had our student leadership program, but we wanted to do something special with these 40 that say, yes, I identify this. I see this in my life. And there just wasn't anything. Like, not to be rude, but there really just wasn't anything. There was one book that we found, and it was like 50 years old, and it was not a book that I wanted to walk these students through. And so it was like, okay, well, maybe we can just create it. And so kind of I laid out, the template, the framework of it, 8-week small group over the summer. They can come to my house and kind of hang out, that type of feel. And then transition happened. I came up here where I am today at the National Office of the Assemblies of God. And then quarantine happened. And it was actually during quarantine where I was just praying one day. I'm like, God, I'm kind of bored. What can I be doing right now? Not being at the local church, it was just kind of a weird feel. Like, what can I be doing right now? And he brought it back up. Like, hey, remember that book that you started? Let's finish that. So
that's so good. I love it. So I want to circle back in a moment. I want to circle back to the what you mentioned about like small groups and getting together. We're right on the edge of camp season here, and so youth pastors are in their final prep going to camp, and Peter, you and I are getting ready to go to camp and speak at camps and stuff like that. And so I want to talk real practically to the youth pastor who's listening right now or listens afterwards. Like, what do I need to be thinking about in preparation for kids that respond and receive a call into ministry? at camp. So two things before we get there. One, if you're listening right now and you've got questions, you're thinking, hey, how do I use this resource, things like that, feel free to drop them in the chat. Join the conversation. We want you to be a part of the conversation. And in fact, invite some of your friends to join the conversation. Tag them in the chat right now, share the link, all that kind of stuff. Second thing I wanted to mention is just for me personally, so part of the story even before that moment where the three of us were together at your camp in Michigan, for me, in many years of youth pastoring, for whatever the reason, I found myself in a situation as a youth pastor where there was some kind of resistance every time I would give a call into ministry. And there was almost this feeling among my volunteer leaders of like, hey, if you single out kids that are called into full-time ministry, you'll make kids that are not called into full-time ministry feel like they're not as important, like they're not as special and what God has for their life as a teacher or an engineer or, you know, whatever they're called to, that will feel of less value to them. And so it actually kind of like muzzled me for a little bit, where I just kind of felt this sense of like, okay, I don't know how to deal with that tension, so I just won't deal with it at all. And when God transitioned us from being, you know, full-time youth pastors into traveling now and speaking, I just felt like the Holy Spirit said to me, like, this is how I wired you. This is what you're wired for. Like, let's go. Like, this is your moment here. And a sense of like, you know, this is how I want to use your life in order to give that call to students. So I know I even shared with you guys right before we went live some of my just personal things I'm praying about for this, you know, summer of ministry coming up and kids that I want to see get called into ministry, you know. And so I know for me, I'm coming into camp season like, let's go. I'm going to be more aggressive than ever before. So John, Peter, you know, John, you as the one who wrote the book and you're developing a small group resource. Peter, you speaking to this question I'm going to ask from a youth pastor perspective. How do I need to be preparing myself as a youth pastor for kids that get called into ministry at camp this upcoming summer?
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I think it's a great question, Aaron, going off of what you were saying earlier. I think that speaks to why we're in the situation we're in today. You know, to where we don't have a lot of people that maybe are feeling called to ministries, because we went to one end of the pendulum to where we're like, well, everyone's called, and that's true. Like there's not a greater call but there are different calls, and we all make up the body of Christ when we come together with those that are called to ministry, those that are called to the workplace. It's a beautiful picture of when we come together and work as the body of Christ. So we can't now swing to the other end and say, okay, well, let's only focus on those that are called to vocational ministry.
Right.
There's got to be a balance. And so in saying that, as you're preparing as a youth pastor or a leader, be intentional about how you can do that, both sides of it. Don't go so far to one end or to the other end, but let's build the body of Christ holistically. Let's do it to where everybody is getting the attention. Everyone has a call. Everyone has a unique call that God has created them for specifically. And so how can we begin to pull that out of students? You know, what does that look like? Is that very practically like every single ministry, every single youth ministry across this nation should have a student leadership? I don't care if there's 2 students in it or 50 students in it. You should have a student leadership where students can come and begin to get developed, and where you can call gifts out of students to where you can say, hey man, you're really good at teaching. Have you ever thought about being a teacher? Like, oh yeah, that's actually, a few people have said that to me, you know, whatever that looks like. But get really intentional about having them in that setting to where it's outside of just a normal service night. Because it's in those settings where you're seeing them serve, you're seeing them on a deeper level, that you begin to see the giftings that God has placed in them, some of the passions that God has placed in them. Again, those called to ministry and those not called to ministry. Our student leadership was always open for anybody. And we were intentional about identifying students that had giftings in other areas as well, not just those called to vocational ministry. So it's kind of the both and. How can we really be intentional about really developing and fostering and calling those things out of students? You know, and I think the very first thing like that I would tell anybody, if you don't have a student leadership program, start there. And I know that can be overwhelming. I know that can be scary. Like, how do I do that? What does that look like? What does the schedule look like? but there's tons of resources out there. You can reach out to me. I have resources from when I was in youth ministry, jzick@ag.org. You can email me and I will send you everything I have on student leadership, because I truly believe that that is a great place to start. Again, if it's 2 students or 50 students, doesn't matter, but begin developing those individuals.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously agree with everything John said, but I think that all of society is designed to help kids that feel called into the secular field. Like that's
Totally.
what all of society is designed for. So when people say like, well, does the called book speak specifically to that? I'm like, no, it's the what resources we do have that is speaking to these other kids that haven't had anything for them as they feel called into the ministry. And I think for us to look to one resource to answer all the questions is crazy. You know what I mean? Like, so I just, hopefully that doesn't sound defensive, but I'm like, dude, like that's what we do. We're customizing specific things for people. Now I still think it would be incredible for a student who felt called to a secular field to read the called book because it's creating thoughts and belief systems in them that will cause them to be an influencer in any field that they go into. But I just think that obviously it's important to have a student leadership, but like that's what society's designed for, to help people go into the field that they want to go into. And this called book is now that for people who feel called into vocational ministry. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. And John, you said something, I think just to circle back to it, you talked about like the pendulum swing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we went through a season in youth ministry and a season in church ministry. And when I say went through a season, I'm referring to, like 10 years ago and 20 years ago, kind of like that period of time, where we wanted to elevate the priesthood of the believers, if I want to be theological about it. Like we wanted to elevate people serving in ministry, and we wanted to really speak to like you can make kingdom level impact as a teacher, as an engineer, as an architect, as a businessman, as a mom who's raising godly kids, you know what I mean? Like all of these things. And so we wanted to elevate that, but we didn't know how to like balance the tension between that and the person who's called to be an apostle or prophet or pastor or teacher or an event, you know what I mean? Like and so now we do, like and I don't want to make the rest of our time here, let's talk stats, but like John, because you probably see more stats than Peter and I do working where you work right now. Like the numbers of those going into full-time ministry has been consistently dwindling and dropping, going down. Some of that I think is because of this trend that, people need to speak to. That's for me, when you said I'm writing a book on this, like, I'm like, yeah, like everything inside of me was like, yes, this is amazing. And then my second thought was like, dang it, he beat me to it. But congratulations, like you did. So I want to go to this question here that Lindsay O'Brien asked, and I know this is something that you've been working on anyway, so this question kind of sets us up really good. But Lindsay asked this question, do you recommend just letting students read the book on their own, or should we do it in a small group format? Lindsay, that's an amazing question. You're going to love John's answer.
Yeah, I think can the book be standalone? Yes. So as a youth pastor, you can feel confident. Here's the book. And kind of wipe your hands clean in a sense. That's kind of the lowest level, I would say. The ideal situation is that this is done in a small group. This is done in a group of 2 or 3 students that all feel called. You're reading a chapter, you're coming back the next week and talking about it and going through it and really diving into it. There's questions at the end of each chapter. And come September, we're actually going to be releasing an 8-week small group curriculum that goes with the book. So it'll be going hand in hand with the book. It's going to be a free resource that we will be releasing come September. So for anyone that has bought the book, anyone that has purchased the book, this will be a free download for them. There's going to be videos that are part of it, discussion guides, all that stuff that will be going with the book, because best case scenario is that this is done in a small group, or even if it's a one-on-one type setting, to where you have a leader and a mentor that's walking through this book with a student that's able to talk a little bit deeper and dive into it a little bit better. I feel like that will always be the answer. Like it will always be better done in community. And when there's a mentor and somebody there, could it be standalone and will students get stuff from it? Yes. So the cool thing about the book is at the end of each chapter, it says, go to this website, called.ag.org, for more resources. And on that website, we have more resources on each chapter. If it's videos, if it's articles, if it's just other resources that have to do with that topic. So a student could go there, and that's all free. They just have to create a free login. But then they have access to all those videos, all those articles, so that they can keep growing and going deeper in these things as an individual. But absolutely the ideal situation is that it's done in a group or with a mentor.
Yeah. And so all the small group resources that you mentioned is going to be on called.ag.org.
Yep.
Again, if you're listening right now, or if you're watching this after the fact, we just dropped that link in the chat. Again, not only can you order multiple copies of the book there, but all the other resources that are already available, plus ones to come, which I think the timing of that is great. That you're going to have small group stuff ready to launch in September. Because again, we'll be post camp season at that point. And you're going to have kids that come back from camp and say, boy, I'm ready. I'm called. I, like Peter, like me, I know the spot in the chapel, in the auditorium where God spoke to me. So Peter, jump in, questions for John that you have, or just additional coaching that you want to offer from a youth pastor perspective.
Yeah, I think, after physically getting a copy of the book and being able to read through it, one of the things I thought about is, sometimes we wait too long to ask the question if a student's called. And I think that's what the book does, is it empowers youth pastors to ask the right questions along the way. So if it's a precursor, you know what I mean? Like if you get the book and you go, I wonder how many students of my students are called. Well, you don't have to wait until camp. Like you can ask them right now and gear them up ready to step into that moment.
And it gives you confidence to lead in that moment. It gives you confidence that you have something. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing though, too, right? Is like we if it's only once a year that you're asking your students, are they called? That's going to be tough, and you'll maybe miss kids that are in the mix that, man, I felt called in December, but right now I'm going through the roughest time in my life in June, and maybe I felt called, but now I don't know, and it's like, man, you could have been on that, and that's what I start to think about, man. I start to think about those moments. I
love to, let's just be honest here. So you guys are referring to earlier in the live stream, you guys referred to that camp experience where there were 50, 60, I don't know, 70, 80 kids, whatever it was, from your respective youth ministries that were called into ministry. We do recognize, right? You guys both recognize that is as much as an evangelist might try to not make it a hyper emotional, potentially manipulative type moment in an altar call, there still is the possibility that a student responds to that altar call, right? I felt called, I walked forward in that moment. Yet for them, in reality, what it might really be is like that was a moment of deep surrender where they decided, my life is going to matter. I think maybe I'm called into ministry. So one of the reasons that I'll add that I love this resource that you've written, John, is that as a student goes through this and they go through the practical coaching that you give them in the book, God's going to use this, and the Holy Spirit will use this to refine and to confirm, so that the student who truly is called into full-time ministry, I think, will come out of a small group experience going through this material like, oh yeah, now I know that I know that I know. Yeah. And the student who is like, goes through it and then comes out on the other side saying, I don't know that I'm called into full-time ministry, but you know what? I'm called to make a difference. Yeah. I'm called to be a world changer. I'm called to make kingdom impact with my life. Yep. Right. And so all of those are wins, right? Totally. That's totally huge. That's what we want.
Yep. And it is, you said those moments can be one of those emotional moments. Well, it is kind of a defining moment. As Peter said earlier, he can point to the spot.
Me too.
You as well. I could as well. When I was 7 years old, I can still point back. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I can point back to that moment and identify that's when I identified the call in my life. Now, what happens is a lot of times, because we hear those stories, but then a majority of the people walk away and don't ever go into ministry.
Yeah.
They don't ever go into, that vocational ministry, but they can still point back to that moment where they felt called.
Yeah.
Like everyone I've talked to is like, yeah, I had that same experience. I just kind of chalked it off to emotion. I just kind of chalked it off to an emotional high or an emotional experience, but they can still point back to that moment where they said, yeah, I felt called, but now I didn't live it. So the goal behind this book is it takes that moment from just being a moment to a defining moment, to where now that can become a defining moment for an individual. Not only was I called, but I was also given practical tools to begin to fulfill that call. And that's when it becomes a defining moment now that will mark them for the rest of their lives. And they'll be able to say, yeah, I remember that moment. That's when it all started, regardless of age, regardless of season they were in. I remember it, and that's why I'm here today.
You know, to your point, John, one of the things that I do at our home church here, Allison Park Church in Pittsburgh, as I'm part of the leadership team for our School of Ministry, which is focused on helping students that feel called into ministry. This year, at least a half dozen students among the 3 dozen or 4 dozen that we have, at least a half dozen students were adult learners that would say, oh, I remember when I was called. Yep. However, I never did anything with it until decades later. Yep. Now here I am in school.
Yep.
You know, and we've all seen that pattern. We've all heard those stories. And so I think, again, that's why this resource is so huge, because as a youth pastor, you're going to be able to coach a student through, like, what is this calling? What does this mean? How does this impact my life? What decisions do I need to make as a student in response to what the Holy Spirit has just told me to do, right? All of that is really unpacked in the book.
Well, I mean, it's going to set up the rest of your life, right? So, like, since I felt called at 7, I was able to navigate my high school and my junior high based on I feel called to ministry. So what did that look like? My senior year, you know, tennis was kind of my sport of choice, and my junior year was all conference and really kind of had some good momentum going into my senior year. My coaches were excited. Well, I had an opportunity to do an internship out in California the summer going into my senior year. So I had to decide in that moment, do I practice tennis all summer, like my coaches want me to, like, you know, and really maybe go all state or whatever? You know, you can always say I could have been pro and I gave it all up, but that was not the case at all.
Especially with that haircut you got. I mean, that's a pro level tennis haircut.
Come on, absolutely. Absolutely. But in that moment, I was able to filter that decision through my call. I was able to filter that decision through, well, even if I am all state, even if I get college scholarships and get offers to go pro, I'm still called to ministry, like vocational ministry. So I made the decision to go to California and do a summer internship out there. Came back my senior year, wasn't I don't even think I was all conference my senior year, because like literally I did not play at all that summer. My coaches were angry. They didn't understand it. But for me, I was like, why would I spend all my time and energy practicing tennis when I could be spending my time and energy preparing for my call? So you're able to filter the decisions you're making. Now, I'm not saying don't play sports. Those are great moments and teams, but where are you putting your energy? Where are you putting your time? And when you know that you're called from 13 years old, you're able to filter some of your decisions through that call.
And you were called at 7, so you were doing like revival services as a 3rd grader.
So yeah, I mean, when I was 8 years old, you know, I was filtering decisions. Do I eat a brownie right now, or do I have a banana? It's filtered through the call.
Hey, listen, when I was a junior higher, especially when I was called in ministry, my family every summer would go camping with another pastor and their family, and me and the other PKs, we would go try to do revival services at every single campground that we went to as a family. We were like knocking on people's RVs, handing out little like flyers that we made with like a Sharpie. Come to our camp meeting service.
That's so awesome. So awesome.
Damn.
Hey, John, question here from Brian. I know that you addressed this earlier, but just hit it again for people that maybe jumped into the stream part way. What's coming in regards to small group resources to go along with this book, and when can we expect that?
Yep. So we'll have a full small group, 8-week small group curriculum with videos and discussion guides and all that, a leader guide, a student guide, coming out in September. And it's going to be totally free for those that have purchased the book. So if you purchased, I think we're still working out some of the details. I think it's like if you buy 5 or more books, the small group material is free, something along those lines. But the goal is just to make it free. We would love just to make it a free resource for anyone. And it's going to be going chapter by chapter through the book. And that will be available come September at called.ag.org.
Amazing.
Yeah. Man, all of this makes me think of the quote. I can't remember who said it or who was responsible for it, but leadership truly is multiplication. And like this just gets me so fired up, man, to multiply my student ministry, my leaders, these kids that are obviously the hand of God is on their life and like, obviously called, but really anointed. You know what I mean? Like anointed to be a minister of the gospel in whatever respected sphere the Lord has called them to. And I'm just excited for the multiplication piece of it. I think this book, and I'm not just saying this because John's my friend or because I think it's great. Like, I think it's worth building our ministries around these kids that are called and pulling out what God has put in them. I mean, honestly, like from the moment Jesus called out to the disciples, the journey began.
Yeah.
And sometimes when kids get called, we're like, all right, just be a part of what's happening. And it's like, they're not building, they're not strategizing, they're not thinking, they're not praying, they're not casting their faith muscle. You know what I mean? It's crazy to think that some people have been called into ministry and the first time they get to really release their faith muscle is when they become a youth pastor or a kids pastor. And it's like, it's been 10 years of you just kind of like floating around, like kind of doing challenges, but not really using what God put in you. That's just not going to work. You know what I mean? Think about it. In terms of kids getting called to ministry, the same distance between when they're called and what they do is the same as a doctor, except when a doctor gets called, right? They have all these skills and like these things that they can do and like immediately they're to the field and they're ready to go. But now we're like, okay, this is where you just get started. Even though that call was way back then. It's like, dude, this is it for us, man. This is what we need.
Peter, that makes me think of what John said earlier in regards to like, I asked the question, what do I need to be thinking about as a youth pastor for kids that call in the ministry? John, your answer was you need to be thinking about student leadership if you don't have that.
Yep.
Right. And that and which maybe for some that was like not the answer they were expecting. Right. Yeah. But what you're getting at, and I'm gonna let you unpack it here as we're getting ready to wrap up here, but I'm gonna let you just kind of crash course in student leadership here for a couple minutes. Right. But what you're getting at is what Peter just said, in that like the moment a student gets called, they need to immediately begin to serve. Yeah. And they need to have opportunity to serve. And John, I'm pretty sure that's why you're pushing student leadership, right? So just give us like a 3-minute crash course lesson in student leadership here.
Yeah, and just opportunity. For me as a youth pastor, my biggest win Wednesday nights when we had our service is when I wasn't on stage once. Like that's when I got most excited. My had an associate youth pastor, Reggie Hill, at the time as well, and he knew it just because he knew how I was wired. And I remember the first time where we just had a totally student-led service. He came back, and I was just standing in the back, and he goes, "This is like your dream, isn't it?" I was like, "Yes, like this is what it's all about. This is what we need to do every single week to where." Maybe the first time we ever touch a microphone is when we're ready to preach or, begin to allow students to have that opportunity as well. And it's a hard, and all of those students were from our student leadership. So, we had kind of our student leader takeover a couple times a year where they totally ran the service from the beginning to the end, from the preparation to the tearing down, everything. They came up with a theme. We brainstormed with them. What do you want the graphics to look like? Like literally everything these student leaders came up with. The message, the announcements, the worship, everything was student leader ran. And those were some of the most exciting moments for me as a youth pastor, is to see students leading and beginning to operate in the gifts and the calling that God has on their life. But what that takes is pastors to put aside, and this might sound harsh.
Just say it. I know what you're going to say. Just go ahead, do it. Go
for
it.
It takes us to put aside the need to build our platform.
Yeah.
And to use any platform we've been given to build other people, and to build other individuals.
And let me speak to that from a very personal perspective. So I didn't get that my first probably 5 years in being a youth pastor. I didn't get that. I did everything. I preached the sermons. I led the worship. I did the announcements. I made the graphics. I made the video, to the point where not only was I losing students over it, but actually some of my adult leaders were actually leaving my team. And when they were leaving, leaders that had been involved in youth ministry for many, many years, even prior to me being there, when they would leave and my lead pastor would say, "Why are you stepping out of youth ministry? You've been apart for so long." They would say, "Well, it's kind of like the Aaron Holt show." right? And I had to go through a real wake up call type moment as a youth pastor to realize like, well, I've like completely removed student from student ministry. You know?
And you're not rare in that sense, Aaron.
Unfortunately not.
Right, exactly. That's kind of the reality. And it's going to suck at times. Believe me, there were times where I was in the back just cringing, because the message and it was awkward transition and the announcements. And it was just like, as youth pastors, you're just like standing back there. But that's what developed these students. That's what gave them opportunity. That's what kept them coming back, is that they were given opportunity, not just to set up chairs. Yes, that's important. I'm not saying don't have them. They set up chairs. Even the service that they ran, they set up the chairs. But they also did some of the stage stuff, and it was chunky and it was awkward, and there was growth moments, and we had to go back and talk like, hey, you probably shouldn't say that from a micro, all those different things, But that's what creates and begins to develop them and gets them excited for what God has called them to do.
It's amazing.
Right. Well, you know what? Most people, and I would say even I definitely went through a season of that too. Most of us have vision for right now. We just don't have vision for 5 years, which is why we don't give students opportunity. You know what I mean? Like we don't understand that. Like this is not just for the moment. This is for where it's going. And honestly, if you're a new youth pastor in any context, like it takes 5 years to really build a great culture anyway. And so when it's rough in the beginning like that, it's like, man, all together we're growing. You're learning how to do ministry. I'm learning how to coach people to do ministry. But here's the other thing too is, and I want to come to like youth pastors like Aid, because when I get into ministry, I've been waiting since a 14-year-old, 15-year-old to do ministry. So now that I'm doing it, you're telling me that I'm not supposed to do it. I'm supposed to empower kids to do it.
Yeah.
The disconnect is there. You know what I mean?
That's absolutely
so I'm like,
fair.
well, let me at least spend some time doing this and then figuring out how to be a coach so that I can coach people to do it. And I think that's, again, where this book is such a win. It's such a bridge, because when they're 14, they've already been a part of some of the stuff, and they don't feel so insecure when they land with their name on the door on the office. They feel like they can empower people.
And what would the church look like 15, 20 years from now if we had pastors and leaders in place that didn't have to fight for their platform, but were given their platform?
Well, and let's double click on that thought there real quick, right? Peter, what you just said is true and fair, and a great defense of the young youth pastor who says, I've been waiting my whole life for this moment, right? Why? That's an upstream problem. And the upstream problem is you probably grew up in a youth ministry where, even though you were called into ministry as a teenager, you weren't given the microphone as a student. You weren't given the opportunity. You were not a student leader who was giving tons of you didn't grow up in John Zick's youth ministry, is what we're saying. Right? And so as a result, when you finally got into full-time ministry, there is that natural desire to be like, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life.
And now I'm going to hoard it with everything that I got.
That's the problem.
And not share it.
And that's why now, like, guys like us are trying to lovingly, but also very firm, like a coach, say that philosophy has to go to the wayside. You got to put, if there's no youth in ministry, there's no youth ministry. If there's no student in student ministry, then there's really no student ministry. Like, we're kind of trying to come along and coach younger youth pastors through that so that we can erase this bad cycle of youth pastors coming in feeling like, I got to do this thing. I've been waiting my whole life to do it. So deal with the problem upstream, right? That's basically what we're saying.
It's so good.
Let me throw one more thought out there. The whole fact that we, like, because we've hoarded our platforms, we've taught the students that ministry is all about the platform.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, I was talking to my student leaders yesterday, and I was like, if you think all the ministry is coming from the platform, we're never going to grow. Like, I need you to know that it's in the moments in between that we begin to build the culture of our youth ministry. It's in between services. It's before and after. It's on Sunday when we're in the hallway. It's all these moments. And the reason students don't feel called to build those moments in between that aren't the platform is because they don't even know they're called yet, though. You know what I mean? And that's really the sauce, bro. Is like, we're trying to teach them Like, we're trying to teach them that, yes, of course, what happens on the platform is incredibly important. Of course, we prepare for it. Of course, it's excellent. But like, I need to get them to see the scope of their life is so much more than what happens in that moment. But because we didn't have anything to educate us when we felt called, we thought it was all about that one moment. And most of us still do think it's about that one moment. So we preach and run into our office, or we come out right at the end of worship, because we don't understand that the moments that really build our ministry are in between the service. We don't get paid for those minutes. We get paid for the moments.
Yeah. And we can't just give away the things that we don't like doing. Because a lot of times that's what we do, right? As leaders, we're like, we're going to build a team around us to do everything that we don't like doing. Give away the things that you like doing, that you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
It was hard for me to only speak. My goal was to only speak once a month. And I love speaking. I love communicating. Like that's a passion of mine. That's a heart of mine. But I had to give that up to see other people developed. And going back to a comment I made, what would it look like 20, 30, 40 years from now if we had secure leaders, confident leaders in place because they were given their platform, they didn't have to fight for their platform. Because when you have to fight for your platform, you're constantly waiting for who's going to try to fight you for your now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but when you are given it, there's a confidence and there's a security that you're able to lead, that you're able to share it now. You don't have to hoard it. You don't have to keep it in for yourself and to build your name or your reputation. You understand, no, this is about giving whatever opportunity that God has given me to build the church and to build other people.
Whew. Peter and John preaching today, friends. Like, no,
dude, it's so exciting.
It's so good. John, you said too, when you were a youth pastor, and you'd sit in the back of the room at times and you'd cringe, right? Like, that was that for me, that was my experience too. When I finally had that moment where I realized, like, my view and philosophy of student ministry needs to change.
Yep.
And I'm called to equip, I'm called to coach, I'm called to train, which involves me putting, students up there on stage, right? So I had those moments too. And I would always sit in the back and I just remind myself, like, I'm probably the only one in the room that really, that even bothers.
For sure.
I'm the like, and I
the
promise,
only OCD one,
right? And then I would also have to remind myself, like, Aaron, the Holy Spirit could care less.
Yep. Aaron, I could go. Yeah.
About that student's awkwardness or their weird sentence or the awkward pause in between, like none of that, And so again, just speaking to, like, go ahead, John, jump in. I know, like, you're like ready to like.
Yes, I mean that's so good, because as leaders, we have to release our personal preferences if we're going to see a next generation developed.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's the personal preferences.
Yeah.
We look at this relationship with King David and King Saul. Most of us know that as a toxic relationship, right? Saul was trying to throw the spear and kill David. But when did that moment start? When did that start where it became a toxic relationship? It could have been an incredible mentorship to where one king is mentoring the up and coming king and developing him and pouring into him, giving him opportunities to lead before he was actually in that seat. It could have been this incredible, what type of lessons could David had learned, if Saul really took that on, but instead it's this toxic relationship. When did that start? Well, we go back to one of their first meetings, where David is ready to slay Goliath, and he goes and Saul tries to put his armor on him. And David said, no, this isn't for me. He gets his slingshot and his stone and he kills Goliath. And so I wonder what happened in that moment when King Saul saw that David succeeded, the up and coming generation succeeded, but it was different than how he would have done it.
Yeah.
It was different than his personal preferences. It was different than the way he would have led or he would have defeated Goliath in that moment. And so what happened in Saul's heart was at the start of this toxic relationship to where it was like, wait a minute, this up and coming generation is succeeding and it looks a little bit different than how I was taught to do this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a little bit different than the way that I would have done it. And that's where, as leaders, we have to put aside our personal preferences. I'm not saying neglect the truths of God, the standards of the word, but our personal preferences? What are the things that are personal preferences to where a new generation might do it different? We don't try to conform them into our mold, but we let them go, and whatever God is anointing. What if King Saul in that moment would have said, let's get rid of all the armor in the armies and let's just give them slingshots and stones, because it seems like that's what God is anointing.
Right.
Obviously that's an extreme, but what could have that have looked like?
Exactly.
If we just saw God's hand is on this, even though it's different than my generation, his hand is on this. This is who he's anointed. Let's begin to build that and develop that now. David was already a great king, but how much more greater could he have been if there was a relationship with him and Saul, a mentor relationship, to where Saul gave him the kingship rather than David having to fight for the kingship?
Let me say this. Outside of a biblical perspective, that's so good.
We're never going to end this.
Never. This podcast is forever going. But listen, outside of a biblical,
the last one, season 3.
Out of a biblical perspective, think about it. Anytime an industry or a company exists that isn't willing to embrace the next generation, they die. It's called Blockbuster. It's called Kodak. It's called like these companies that won't embrace new ideas, fresh perspectives, won't essentially run after what's blowing up. Man, they eventually end up killing themselves. The poison they drink is the resistance against the next generation. And what's so incredible about all of this, even John Wright in the book, is that I want to tell everybody, John is not getting a penny for this book. Not 1 cent. Okay, so all the passion you sense from him is coming out of a place of, man, he's interested in helping ministries build and grow, and that's why you're one of my best friends on the planet, bro. Like, I honor you because that's incredible. Who spends all this time developing such an incredible resource and says, I don't want a penny of it? That's honorable, and we appreciate you, man, for real.
And we're also going to launch a GoFundMe today for John Zick Ministries. Oh man, this is so good. Season 3 finale just turned into like all of season 4 too. So this is good. Peter, we need to add John as a co-host for season 4.
That's it.
We just need to keep adding more. Like
we would never have any guests, man.
It
would just be us 3 and these 2 mustaches. We see this. I just realized on the stream too that you put Aaron Holt, John Zick, and I'm the label with the @Peter Reeves.
I got the soul patch. I got the
so it looks like I'm promoting myself @Peter Reeves, John Zick, Aaron Holt.
Peter Reeves out here building his platform,
building my platform. Seriously, follow me at Peter Reeves 23.
Hashtag.
Hashtag. Follow me on Periscope.
Peter, you know what? But Peter, we never talked about that shot that LeBron James hit the other night, though. Like, I mean,
why are we talking
the
about
Wars?
And now
John is a Warriors fan.
No,
John thinks that Steph Curry belongs in the conversation with Michael Jordan and LeBron James.
Oh,
of changing the game.
Please, guys, this has been such a strong finale. Let's not let it go off the cliff this way.
Steph Curry has like Michael Jordan and LeBron.
John, your mic's cutting in and out. I can't even hear you. I don't understand you.
Oh my God!
You need to tell the national office to upgrade their Wi-Fi, man. So.
We love you, John. You're amazing.
This has been so good. So, hey, listen, if you're still watching. Once again, John's brand new book called, we've dropped the link in the chat a couple times. We'll drop it one more time for you because you're going to want to go to the website, buy multiple copies of the book, not just one for yourself, buy multiple copies of the book so that you can be prepared. Especially, we're going into camp season here. You're going to have students that feel called into ministry, and you're going to want to have something to offer them the moment that they're at camp or coming home. There's small group resources that are going to be available on that website coming out this fall in September, and great stuff. John, just once again, Peter and I both just want to say not only thanks for finishing out season 3 of LTG Live, but more importantly, much more importantly, thanks for your labor of love writing this book right here, just going after it. Thanks for being bored in the middle of quarantine and praying a simple prayer. Jesus, what do you want me to do? And he's like, yo, write that book.
Yeah.
And this is going to be such a valuable resource for youth pastors and for students across the nation. And can't wait to see how many languages this gets turned into when it's all said and done. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go global with this thing.
Spanish right now. It's in process. Released.
That's amazing.
June. We'll have Spanish.
So good. So, John, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you guys. This was fun.
For those of you that are with us on a regular basis, Peter and I will be back for season 4 after the summer camp season is over. We're going to be hitting the road here strong, calling kids into ministry,
right.
and just seeing God do incredible things. Peter, close us out, man.
Yeah, man. I feel like this season was a season marked with the phrase "getting better." And getting better in so many different ways, so many different innovative ideas presented on this podcast in this last season. And so hopefully you'll go back and take a listen and invite your leadership teams into it. I'll even say this, man, for those kids that feel called, what an awesome podcast to tune into, the Student Leadership Podcast, this podcast for your leaders and your teams. We're just trying to help build youth ministries, build youth pastors, take everything we're doing to the next level. So we love you. And John, we're super thankful for you, bro. And we'll definitely have you on season 4. Everyone, thanks for tuning in.
Let's
Thanks,
go.
Guys.